Let's see if we can get this meeting going here. All right, first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the special meeting we had on the 27th of March. Commissioners, have you had a chance to review the minutes?
Yes.
And have you seen the errors or omissions?
No.
No. Okay, so I recommend be open to approval of the minutes as is.
I'll second.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. Next item is public input. This has to do with any items that are not on the agenda. So if you're here for something else that isn't on the agenda, I'd like to know it at this time. Yes, ma'am. Could you?
I think it's really important to be informed, and I try to be informed. I go to most of the council meetings and some of the commission meetings, but somehow just a couple of days ago, I heard about the housing units being developed on Mondo Lane, and it just shocked me that I didn't know that, because I guess it was known a long time ago. But I think about these families who parents work and then raising kids, and how do they know what's going on? So my suggestion is to write a summary after every commission meeting and post it. So at least we can kind of get caught up that way, maybe. And then on the housing thing, when I learned that, I thought...
Hold on a second. There'll be a public hearing on that's an agenda item on the element sheet, and you'll have an opportunity to bring that up at that time. But I was looking for any, at this time, input only on things that aren't on the agenda. The housing element. Okay, in regards to your original, we'll take it under advisement and we'll discuss it with staff and try to figure out if there's a better way to kind of help in that. Okay? Does that help?
Yes. Can I go on with the other little thing?
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah, you got something else?
Yeah. When I heard about the housing, I thought about how the state had required 35 units to be developed. And then we went to 40. I can't imagine why we would do that, because it's such a sensitive subject. But what about the 10 units or so that are on Mondo? Couldn't we subtract those from the... I'm not going to ask a question, but I'm just wondering if those could be subtracted.
Yeah, this is all agenda stuff that you're bringing up. So it's still, I'm asking for only things that aren't on the agenda.
Okay, well, and then I'll just summarize by saying I wish that we could have a town hall meeting. I think it's time for people to have questions and want to find out more.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Remember, this part of the agenda is only those items that aren't on the agenda. If you have a question about something or want to bring it up, now's the time to do it. If not, we'll get back onto the agenda. Is there anything else? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Do I have to get over there?
Well, it would be helpful if you could.
Sure.
Okay.
State your name, please.
State name, state business. I think you're here for a potential agenda item, whether it's this time or another time.
All right.
And I see that we do have a lot of things that are happening all in the same area, which I think is collectively known as the ozone. And while I see individual projects occurring, the Russo, the Danco, what's commonly referred to as Danco, and while it's not an agenda item, there's been a lot of discussion about an RV park down there as well. But what I'd like to see is a potential agenda item to start a conversation is we have a lot of individual items, and collectively we talk about the ozone. But I'd like to know, is this part of a defined, written, approved plan for that entire area?
Yeah, it was a zone change. Gary, I'll let you.
We don't typically answer questions or respond.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank
I
you,
guess
Gary.
I guess something more of a master plan. There's so many concerns whether we talk about infrastructure individually, the impact of the Danco, or the Russo, or an RV unit, or whatever might happen there. But collectively, this is a very large impact. And so before we go rushing down, it seems like we have some opportunities to dial it back and make sure that we're doing a larger scope view of that area, and not just by way of how it's zoned, but the larger impact and implications of some of these independent projects that are occurring on the table. So I'm
Thank
asking
you.
to get specifically a master plan for that area before we're moving forward on these individuals.
All right, thank you for your comments. Okay, yes, ma'am.
My name's Becky Thornton, and I agree with her. I think that there has to be something put together, so you have this master plan or something that would let all this come to one, and so we can all know what's going on.
Very good. All right, thank you for the comments. All right, and we'll move on to,
Yeah, we're not done yet.
any input? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, two things I wanted to commend the commission. I was noticing in the minutes from the March meeting how responsive you were to public comments, how you were able to listen to them and discuss them and then incorporate some of the concerns that were appropriate into your final work. So I really want to commend you for that. Second thing is, have you decided not to put these meetings on Zoom?
Yes.
Because the city, and is there any reason for that? I know some people who wanted to be here but couldn't. And we're hoping to maybe even be able to see it, even with no back and forth, or just to listen to the meeting and just being productive, that kind of thing. Is there a reason you decided to not do that?
I know there was a change with regards to us being allowed to attend meetings via Zoom,
Right.
state law requirements, so I don't know if it stops
and
being.
again, we don't typically respond. We'll just take the public comments and then
Right. Okay.
we follow up.
Anyway, so that, if you could put that on a future agenda, I know the city council now, it still does Zoom the meetings, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Hi, I would just like to echo what already been said. I think maybe unintentionally, but it is a bit misleading to be bringing forward one project at a time. It's not really showing the full impact that it's going to have. I know there's multiple projects as stated that are going on, so just presenting 133 housing unit at a time and then slowly adding them on, it just seems like we're maybe not getting the full scope of what the full end result will be. And I think we could make better informed decisions if we knew everything that was actually going on completely, not just individualized projects as stated. I also don't understand this day and age why we wouldn't have Zoom. I think that every aspect of technology is advancing the world, and I can't really understand why we would take a step back in this area. Specifically as a mother, it'd be really beneficial to have Zoom. I also just would really like to see that be brought back, or I don't know if we can put that on the agenda to be voted for, or but Zoom being addressed would be wonderful. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your comments. What was it?
My non-defense.
Go ahead.
Chairman, members of the commission, I have three non-agenda items to comment on. I support the call that others have made for a master plan process for the opportunity zone. I believe that the cumulative impacts of the current project and the proposed RV park that we've had some discussions of from city staff in the past are likely to be significant, specifically traffic. Secondly, I believe that we're in need of development of objective design standards. The last two efforts at a housing element were not certified in the fourth and fifth rounds, and the state has provided comments to city that they need to have objective design standards. The use of the DDA, disposition and development agreements, is a workaround, as I understand from Planner Reese, but I'm not sure that's really going to last in the long haul. So I'd like to start by suggesting to you in this public forum, and I've been recommended to go to the city council, and I have, that we develop objective design standards and get away from these subjective design standards currently in use. This should be done prior to any new large projects. For example, the project on Taylor Way with 40 residential. Lastly, I'd like to call for a public workshop to be held in the housing element in addition to the nice presentation that I'm sure Planner Reese will give to you tonight, because a lot of folks here for a lot of different reasons, but I think that topic by itself is complicated enough and has gone on long enough that most people in this community don't understand it. Until 2 weeks ago, I was not familiar with it. And so it takes a lot of time and effort to get people to be aware of it first and then to hopefully comprehend the fine points. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments outside the agenda? Yes.
Angela Dare. I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to speak. I'm going to agree that in this day and age, I don't see a reason why we can't have a Zoom meetings so that we can all attend. I know that we have,
you know, people with young children. We also have elderly, and for whatever reasons, people aren't able to attend at that particular, you know, what have you. I'd like to see the Zoom meeting. Also, I would like to see a master plan also. As they said, it's just kind of bits and pieces here, this housing unit, that housing unit. It doesn't show us the whole impact. We can't really make decisions, and so I don't know how you could either. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other comments?
I would like to make a comment.
Go right ahead.
Would it be appropriate to do it here?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I would just like to read this. This is out of actually Arcata. Oh, I'm sorry, my name.
My question, is it an agenda item that you're commenting on?
No,
Okay, non-agenda item.
correct,
Okay,
sir.
very good.
Yes. Again, this is from Arcata City Council. They have kind of like a heritage element in their general plan, and I keep up with listening to, as I do my little farm chores, most of our county and other cities, again, as Angela said, provide Zoom for their meetings and online access. Like 14, the city council was just having a live as I was hustling out. I really love taking advantage of humble access and stuff like that. It's great for our commissions and our councils and city staff to take advantage of seeing what's going on in the rest of our community. So just throwing that out there, you know, as much as possible for our public and our commissions to really take advantage of that resource that we have to, you know, we are Blue Lake, but we are our neighbors as well in neighboring towns and the policies that they're going through and procedures for, because, you know, we're all in the same boat, you know, we're in California, so everything's going down the same ship line. But I just love this quote. It says, no city can hope to understand its present or forecast its future if it fails to recognize its past. By tracing and preserving its past, a city can gain a clear sense of the process by which it achieved its present form and substance. So I just really love that quote. I think it's really important, you know, and that we really prioritize on those foundations because they were built us. And I think it's important to stay to those foundations with that knowledge that was given to us by our predecessors. And again, I would like to promote some Zoom access. I really hate to be probably the only one in the room that really has a lot going on through all of this. I love that City Council has really stepped forward with Zoom access for me selfishly, just to be honest. And I think it's a great access for all the community because as we see a full house, there's obviously a need for just that transparency. When we get minutes, that's great. It's all consolidated. We miss a lot of content. So I don't want to take any more, and I appreciate the time to speak.
All right, thank you for your comment. Any other non-agenda item comments? All right, very well. And we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. Approval of the agenda. Any
Motion to approve the
motion
agenda.
to approve? Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, very
Who
good.
was the
Agenda.
second?
All right, we'll go on to item number 4, which is the public hearing and discussion amendment of the Blue Lake General Plan housing element for the 6th planning cycle, 2019 to 2027. Discussion of the revisions to the second draft of the housing element update submitted to the California Department of Housing and Community Development on April 28, 2023. Gary, I'll let you, is there a procedure since the,
Yeah, I'll go over our recommended for this item, and I'll do that for each item tonight.
all right, terrific, very good.
Andy,
Go right ahead.
could we turn the lights down so folks can see the presentation better? So hi, everyone. I'm Gary Reese. I'm a consulting city planner to the city of Blue Lake, and our firm, SHM, provides planning and engineering services to Blue Lake. And I'm going to give a PowerPoint presentation about the housing element update process that the city is currently going through. And this item's on the agenda to update the commission on where we're at with the housing element update process and also to get public comment from the community. So the recommendation to the commission for this item is to receive a presentation from city staff on revisions to the housing element update in the second draft, to open a public hearing and take public testimony, close the public hearing and discuss the revisions to the element and ask questions of city staff. And then we would ask that you continue the public hearing to the next regularly scheduled planning commission meeting on June 19th. So just to give a little bit of background, the city of Blue Lake has needed to do housing element updates since the last time it did a comprehensive general plan update. So this shows you going back to 1986, the last time they did a comprehensive general plan update. And it was adopted then, but wasn't certified. In 1992, Bob Brown, who's here, who's been city planner for a long time, prepared it. It was adopted and certified by the state. In 2004, Bob and I worked together to get it adopted and certified. In 2009, it was adopted but not certified. In 2015, there was a draft prepared, reviewed by Department of Housing and Community Development, but it was not ultimately adopted. So essentially, the last two housing element planning cycles, we haven't had a certified housing element. We're currently in progress working on an update for the sixth planning cycle, which is 2019 to 2027. And this is a question that gets asked all the time. Well, so what? We don't have a certified housing element, or we're not complying with state housing law. What does that mean? And so these are basically the three main consequences. First and foremost, the city could be sued. The State Department of Housing and Community Development has sued cities for not achieving compliance with state housing law through updating their housing elements. Huntington Beach is an example of that. Also recently, the city of Elk Grove was sued by the state for denying an affordable housing project. There's also pro-housing groups out there. One example is Yes in My Backyard Law. They sue communities for not complying with state housing law. They have submitted Public Records Act requests to the city of Blue Lake in the past, but thankfully nothing came of it. The second consequence is the city could be denied grant funding. City of Blue Lake, a small community with limited financial resources, relies very heavily on grant funding. Not having that funding available would be crippling to the city. So having a compliant housing element and achieving compliance with state housing law is key in order to be able to obtain some of those funding sources. And then lastly, and many of us may already know this, but the state could take away local control. Accessory dwelling unit law is a good example of that. It's much easier to do accessory dwelling units today than it used to be. In some cases, control has been taken away on planning, having any review on them. If you have an existing structure, you can turn it into an ADU without meeting development standards and things like that. There's other laws out there like the Housing Accountability Act as well, which has protections for affordable housing projects. So there's a number of state laws out there that have already taken away some local control. And if you don't achieve compliance with your housing elements, there's even more avenues in which local control would be taken away. And in some ways, the housing element allows the city to decide what types of housing and where they go in the community. So that's some of the control that we have through doing a housing element update. So I've mentioned this a couple times. I don't know if everybody's familiar with this state agency. It's the California Department of Housing and Community Development. This is the primary agency that implements and enforces state housing law. So if we were to get a violation letter on not being in compliance, this is who it's going to come from. And this is the agency that has sued the communities that I mentioned previously. Also involved in housing in Humboldt County is the Humboldt County Association of Governments. They work with HCD to determine the amount of housing that's needed in the county, but more importantly, how it's distributed to the different communities, all the cities and then the county. And this here is a document that HCD prepares every housing element planning cycle. This is the 2019 one that was developed for our current planning cycle, the sixth cycle. And this is the document that identifies for the city what its share of the regional housing need is. And what that really means is what we have to plan for, the number of units and in what income categories. And so this here is a chart from that document which shows the city's current allocation in the sixth planning cycle. So you'll see on the right, the number is 23. You can see how it's distributed between the different income levels. One important note is that the city didn't have a certified element last cycle. The number was 11 then. To be punitive for communities that don't achieve compliance with state housing law or update their elements, they make you add that 11 or that allocation from the last cycle to the current cycle and plan for all of that in your current element updates. So the 11 plus 23 is 34. That's the minimum number of units that the state is asking the city to plan for. And essentially what that means is mostly identifying adequate sites where the housing can be developed with appropriate or reasonable development standards that development would be subject to. So just in case anybody was interested in how they define these income levels, according to American Community Survey, I think the Humboldt County median household income is about $53,350. So if you were to split that up amongst these income levels, you know, you've got very low income below 26,000 approximately, low income between 26 and 42. You've got the moderate between 42 to 64 and the above moderate over 64. So I included this figure here to show what we've identified in the sites inventory in the housing element as the vacant sites or underutilized sites available for development. They're mostly interested in vacant sites because those are the easiest to develop with housing. Underutilized sites, you have to justify more why they would be able to help you plan for housing or meet your share of the regional housing need. So what you see on this side, these are the properties that are basically west of City Hall here or northwest. And these are the sites that we've been identifying in past housing element updates is where we could put most of our residential development. And HCD for years has said, well, okay, some of these already have development, look like they're in agricultural use. How do we know they'll ever be developed for housing? Also, they have significant wetland areas, drainages, and environmental constraints. They've got a substandard road like South Railroad. It would be the greatest for serving that. So for years, they've really questioned how suitable are these sites for you meeting your share of the regional housing need. And so in our planning effort for the Opportunity Zone in the Powers Creek District, we've now identified these sites as having residential development potential. And so that's where we're really saying, these sites are better suited than those in that they have fewer environmental constraints, they have better utilities and access and things of that nature. So those are important sites that are identified in our sites inventory in this current housing element update that we're working on. So just to give a little bit of a timeline on what we've been doing, we started on this process about 2 years ago. We got funding from the state through the Local Early Action Planning Program, LEAP as it's called, and it's really what is allowing Blue Lake to even do this work at all. It's expensive to do a housing element update. It's expensive to do a general plan update. That's why the city has only done targeted updates as needed to comply with state law or based on changing community sentiment. But anyway, I gave a presentation probably 2 years ago at a joint session of the City Council and Planning Commission about some of these same issues, and so I'm regurgitating some of it. But anyway, we worked for a while on the first draft with the Planning Commission, many public hearings and meetings, and we submitted our first draft in May of last year. And prior to submitting it, as required by HCD, we held a 30-day public comment period. And then we had to take 10 days to consider those comments and, as appropriate, incorporate them into the element before we submitted it. So what that's called basically when they receive that first draft is they have kind of their 90-day review period. That's part of the process. They take 90 days to review that first draft. And so we didn't receive comments back from them. We got a comment letter in August of 2022. And we met with them shortly after that to get clarification on some of what they were asking for and things like that. And so from August of last year to April of this year, we worked on addressing their comments. We added additional demographic data, additional analysis. We revised the sites inventory. The city conducted a housing condition survey. So a lot of work was put into addressing those comments. And then basically in April, we were prepared to submit a second draft to them addressing their comments. And as mandated by HCD, we held a 7-day public comment period prior to submittal of the second draft. I received a few comments. None of them necessitated revisions that were needed to achieve compliance with state housing laws, so we submitted at the end of April to HCD, and we're waiting to hear back from them. They said they received our document, but we don't know when we'll be meeting with them or how long the review will take at this point. So just to touch on kind of some of the things that they noted, these are just kind of a highlight of stuff they asked us to change in the first draft and what we did with the second draft. So one of the things they really identified is that the city's zoning code in a lot of ways was written to inhibit multifamily housing and by default housing for special needs populations, and that's something that the state said that's not okay. You know, that's inconsistent with state housing law. You need to evaluate your standards and include additional programs to amend your zoning code as appropriate, so you're not providing a constraint to multifamily development or inhibiting it. Also, they asked us to add a program to commit the city to additional actions if we saw a lag in housing production behind what was projected in the housing element update. And then I noted a little bit on the revisions to the sites inventory, but they wanted us to provide a realistic capacity determination. In other words, to better justify how we came up with the densities that could be developed on some of the larger sites in the city. And then also, we hadn't shown that we were meeting, that we had enough sites for above moderate housing. You know, we've been focusing more on the moderate, low, and very low, which are a big priority for the state, but you have to plan for all of them. So what we noticed is that single-family lots, if there's still a developable single-family lot in the city, you know, like say 6,000 square feet or something like that, lately it's been developed with nice homes, custom homes. And so we kind of use that methodology to say those sites are appropriate for above moderate housing. And then lastly, I noted the housing conditions survey. City staff went around the city and looked at the entire housing stock to identify what amount of rehabilitation, if any, that it needed. And you know, we haven't compiled all the results yet, but a significant amount of the housing stock in the city is in need of some amount of rehabilitation. So just kind of a segue into talking about some more of the changes. This is the cover of our current 6th cycle housing elements, showing the modified date of April. And as I noted, you know, we added additional demographic data analysis, revised the sites inventory. But the most important thing really in these housing element updates is your implementation programs, because that's what you're committing to. That's what you're telling the state. We're going to do these things so we can achieve compliance with state housing law. So I think we had 16 programs in the first draft, and we added some, and I'd like to go over the ones we added, just so everybody's familiar with what these additional programs are. So program 17 here is about production of accessory dwelling units. And essentially, they said, well, what if your ADUs are lagging behind your projections? We'd like you to commit to additional actions to incentivize ADU production. And what we projected, they asked us to revise our projection of ADUs. They told us it was too high because of the very low number of ADUs that have been developed in prior years. I think we had 1 or 2 in the last 5 years. So what we projected is that we would have 4 between now and the end of the planning period, which is 2027. Feel that's reasonable based on past production. It could be more, we'll see. But if it lags behind what we projected, they're asking that we do additional things, conducting outreach to inform the public about current state law for ADUs. There's a lot of folks that aren't aware of how easy or how much easier it is to develop ADUs nowadays. Also, potentially, this is a more aggressive action, but amending the municipal code to incorporate ADU standards that are more permissive. What we're proposing right now, because ADU law is constantly changing, is just to reference current state law and say we'll comply with that. We're not going to be more permissive. We're just going to follow state law. And then for the third, this is even more aggressive, but rezoning sites in the city that have non-residential zoning, so commercial or other types of zoning, to allow residential development. So that's a new implementation program there, number 17, regarding, it's not a question and answer, sorry. There'll be opportunity to comment during when that hearing's open. So this is program 18 that we added. We noted in the housing element that at some point the city is going to get close to its wastewater capacity that it has. And they said, okay, well, you need to commit to when you're going to do the upgrades the city has planned to add additional capacity. You need to tell us when, within how many years, or, when you'll get that done. And so essentially we said, okay, within 2 years of adoption of this element, those would be done. Reality is it will probably happen sooner. But the city has already investigated the need for upgrades to increase capacity of the wastewater treatment plant. It was done so at the time that Mad River Brewery wanted to expand their production. I don't know if it was doubling, but they significantly wanted to expand their production. The city had to look at it and say, all right, how do we get more capacity out of the system? And in that analysis, they identified the improvements, the equipment needed, the costs, all of that stuff. The brewery expansion didn't happen, but the city is now prepared to do that for the development proposed in the Powers Creek District. And as it's noted here, those upgrades are anticipated to provide additional 180 residential equivalent units. So essentially 100, enough capacity for like 180 houses, single family houses, if you will. Is that correct, Mike? Okay. Program 19, this one really struck at the heart of what issues they found with our zoning code, that it's designed to inhibit multifamily development. So you'll see here a number of zoning code amendments that are proposed related to ground coverage, building height, setbacks, things of that nature, that in some zones with multifamily housing, we have more lenient standards, and for not really sure what reason, but in other zones, we have more strict standards. And they said, that doesn't make sense. Some of these zones, the standards you're identifying is available for multifamily, but what we see here is a bunch of rules that inhibit the ability to do that. So we're committing to basically amending the zoning code to make it consistent kind of across the board the way we treat multifamily projects. Only a couple more, so bear with me. So implementation program 20. This has to do with the transparency requirements in government code. That this is really so a developer could go on the city's website and know what fees would I pay for a project, what's the zoning, what's required for a complete development application, how did you develop your development impact fees, things of that nature. So they have all that information readily available to determine whether they want to do a project on a certain property in the city. So we have some of this stuff, or the city has placed some of this stuff up there. Some of it needs updating and then needs to be uploaded, and we're committing to doing that through the implementation of the housing element. So the program 21 that was added, this is about the fact that we have subjective review criteria in our site plan approval process. We have these principles to be followed. And they have subjective criteria saying things like, is it compatible with the character of the community and adjacent development? The problem the state has with that is, it depends on the person reviewing the project as to whether they view it as consistent with the character of the community or adjacent development. So it's subjective. And they're essentially saying if you're going to have this process and you're going to have standards, you need to have them be objective. And we have the definition there that there's no personal or subjective judgment by a public official, which is kind of the most important part. That a developer could read those standards and say, I know exactly what they're asking, and I could design a project based on that. I'm not going to go to a hearing and have somebody tell me it's not consistent with the character of the community, which is currently out of compliance with state housing law to have those kinds of subjective standards. And then program 22, they asked us in their comments, you guys have design guidelines, mentioned in a couple of your zones. So are these enforceable? Like, are these a constraint on housing development? We're not clear. And so in our response, we noted that they're not. They're guidelines. They're exactly what they sound like. We're encouraging people to do these things. And really what you would have in their place is objective standards that are prescriptive and tell people what they need to do instead of kind of just saying it should kind of look like this. So we'll be amending the zoning code to make it clear they're not enforceable standards. They're just recommendations. And I believe this is the last program that was added. This is related to us monitoring housing development during the planning period, annually reviewing, what development happens on sites we identified in the housing element. And essentially, they're asking if the annual review shows that you're not providing sufficient opportunities for affordable housing, then you're going to review your zoning code and consider additional actions such as incentives or other regulatory mechanisms to encourage construction at higher density ranges. And then, things that could include is like requiring a minimum residential density instead of just a maximum. Things like density bonuses, concessions, things of that nature. But that would be in the case that we're not meeting our projections on the sites we identified. So that's kind of an overview of the revisions that we made from the first draft based on HCD's comments. So if you were to review the second draft, you're going to see a lot of that stuff. Like I said, the program is the most important because that's what we're committing ourselves to. And just we had that 7-day comment period. That in no way prohibits people from continuing to comment. We still have a process to go through. This thing still has to be adopted. We haven't even had HCD tell us they think it's compliant with state housing law yet. So there's going to be plenty of opportunities for folks to comment, and please continue reviewing the document, continue providing comments. The decision makers need to hear what you guys have to say. So as far as the next steps in the process, meeting and working with HCD to address any further comments they have, so we can have them tell us where we're close to compliance, and we can actually go through the adoption process with the Planning Commission and Council. Where appropriate and feasible to achieving compliance with state housing law, incorporating public comments. To be honest, some of the comments we received are anti-housing, and it's not something we can really incorporate into the element and still achieve compliance with state housing law. But there's comments that were totally relevant to what we're trying to do and were incorporated into the element. And then also we have to go through the CEQA process. Once HCD tells us we're close to compliance, those implementation programs will be the project description that we'll be analyzing in the CEQA document. And once we finalize that, it will be circulated for a 30-day public comment period. Again, another opportunity for the public to participate and comment. And then lastly, once HCD has said we're looking pretty good and we go through CEQA, then completing the housing element adoption process, going to the Planning Commission, holding public hearings, and they would make a recommendation to the City Council. And then ultimately, the City Council would take the final action on the adoption of the housing element. So that concludes my presentation. If you want to turn the lights back on.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, Gary.
And as noted in our recommendation, we encourage you to open the item up for public comment.
All right, let's open this up for public comment. I think there's a time limit for each comment. And let me clarify that, Gary, that's 3 minutes, is that correct?
Yeah, and Mandy, you'll be running a timer.
Okay, very good. So I would prefer that you state your name and hopefully you're a resident here of our fine community. Be as clear as you possibly can. I'm not trying to rush you or anything. If you got a lot to say, then we understand, but please try to stay within the 3 minutes if at all possible. So we'll go from there. Don't all jump up at one time.
We public comment time?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Bam.
Yep. Please come to the podium. It would be helpful.
Sorry, I have to, my husband's helping me with chores right now. I need help choking my water. So, thank you, Reese, for your presentation. I think in its whole entirety, I did miss last segment, but just in the first 2/3, its reflection back on what's actually being proposed was kind of vague. We have had communications with HCD. The only thing is those communications back to public have been fairly minimal with that kind of thing. I mean, I try and attend as many city council meetings as I can, and we don't really get reports back from you guys at those meetings. I asked for a report on this stuff, the last one. The other alternative sites, I wouldn't classify them as ag lands. That is wetlands. That's being horse pasture. But at the same time, they're privately owned, not city owned. So I don't know if that's kind of what's going on. And, I understand this process costs money, But at the same time, public input from HCD is very important. In fact, if anybody wants to write to them after this, I have the email. We get some time, if they pass this, to do that. And I think that if we have these expenses so much time that we need the public input, okay? Look at all this now, like we can sit down and hash this stuff out in a non-formal way just to be informed and knowledgeable, or at least some reports at City Council. You're supposed to be contacting low-income households to draft this stuff. I may have a farm, but I tell you what, I would be one of those peoples. Just the general plan does not support any of this. And I don't understand why we're not doing what Arcata's doing. They've had several special meetings dedicated specifically to their general plan and gateway plan. They've been doing them the last few weeks. So again, that's why I commented earlier about maybe we should be paying attention to what other cities are doing. They are doing their general plan first. And their gateway plan is kind of a sneaky way on their citizens to do their housing element. They're going after, there's a lot of community uprising. We're not the only ones, folks. Eureka and Arcata are going through the same issue where the public just feels like, I know we've been saying we're doing this for 2 years or 3 years. I've been trying to stay involved. I've been trying to push for more community involvement, but only one person can do so much. We need to start opening our commissions and our city and council to just, put this out a little bit sooner. This is a great presentation. We could have it a little bit sooner and be a little bit more involved. I don't want to take any more time, and I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Hi.
State your name.
My name is Verda Pitts. I was trying to find a reference on the housing element where our city planner was talking about the wastewater situation and just that we will be at, sorry, the proposed, I wish I could read it verbatim, but the proposed projects will put us at capacity for our wastewater systems. And then, I'm not trying to get off subject, but if you reference in the Danco agreement, they have it crossed out where one of the negotiations was for them to be financially responsible for upgrades to the wastewater system. So I'm wondering who is responsible to the upgrades for the wastewater system that will be done in 2 years.
Thank you. Next. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Liz Brown, and I've been advocating for the trail in Blue Lake for a number of years through several of these zoning changes and the opportunity zone particularly because I think it's a huge asset for our community. McKinleyville is buying now what we already have, and I think we need to enhance it, preserve it. Open spaces are going to be a few of the future, value even more in the future. So with the ozone, many citizens, the planning commission, the city council all discussed this issue. We worked really hard. There were proposals back and forth, and I think we ended up with some good compromises so that the trail would not become an alley in a big sea of buildings, but it's clearly a natural state as it is right now. And so I just wanted, this is a big document, and I've been trying to read it as best I can, but I wanted to make sure that was preserved. The housing element didn't destroy the natural element. It didn't make our things that we value and degrade them just because it's a housing element. So I'm hoping that there'll be some coordination, some thought given to that. There aren't any changes in here to the opportunity zone that we worked so hard to come up with standards for. Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Hello, my name is Lisa Hoover, and I just want to, some of this has to do with the need for the public forum to understand this. What was going about the trails, cumulative effects. We've also got issues about road access to this area. We've got issues about, we have 3 developments and potentially Paradise K is another one. And so I think, and as other people have expressed, the individual, we look at this, look at that, but what about the cumulative effects of this area? And I'm not opposed to the housing. I think that was misrepresented in the comments to the HCD, the Housing and Community Development. In the response to their comments, it made it sound like that there are people who don't want housing. And there might be those, but I would not argue per what was written by the manager that they're opposed to it. I think what it is being informed and having forums that don't require you to go to this meeting, that meeting. And I asked for one in February, and other people had in 2021 asked to be more involved. There was one public meeting. Never saw any minutes from that, never saw anything from that. So prior to moving in, someone else mentioned a master plan, which again gets at the big picture of this and the infrastructural things like the sewer and the roads. So I'm here to advocate, and I did get a letter in by what I thought was the 7-day deadline. So I did want to put that forward, that there needs to be a forum at junctions of development and also master planning, not just, for this one thing and this one thing, but at junctions of significant development that affect the whole area. Because there are also things like lighting issues relative to the neotropical wildlife that goes through there. And also what was said at the bottom of today's agenda says, the project is found to be categorically exempt from CEQA. And so I have a question for Reese, because it talks about CEQA right there, finalizing a CEQA initial study for the element update. Again, since there are nuances to this, how you do these developments, I'm not sure if this CEQA is the same as that CEQA, but I've been wondering about also, when is this CEQA for developments, again, going to be made public at these particular forums that are periodic throughout the year, not just this meeting and that city council meeting. But I was curious about that because, and so Mr. Reese, you might be able to answer that, because the minutes say that those two projects, Danco and also Rousseau, are exempt from CEQA, and yet right there it says finalizing CEQA initial study. So again, sort of a on the agenda topic and off would be public forums periodically with developments of this community. Not to say it's opposed to developments, but it's just like getting a sense of the scale, what it means, what the infrastructural, how they're going to be paid for. It has been advocated and requested. I've read the minutes since 2021, so thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So can Mr. Reese answer the secret question?
So we're just taking public comment, it's not a back and forth.
When can I get the answer?
If the commission would like staff to answer that question, they can request us to answer that question.
Okay.
Any more comment?
Matt Watts. And mine relates to what you were saying about the sewer plant and trying to plan it so that the sewer system is ready before the housing goes in. I'd like to add that should apply to the fire department and any law enforcement increase. If you feel that adding 500 or 600 people might be, there are probably plans already as far as like adding to the sheriff, but I just want to make sure, the fire department is very concerned about, I'd like to see 2 more paid people. Where does the money come from? And all that. So I just want to mention that, if that's in the plan, that would be set up before the tenants come in. How many, if we need a policeman, if we need 2 more paid firefighters, another truck or whatever, another ambulance or something like that. So.
Very good. Thank you. Any more comments? Sure, go right ahead.
I just have 2 questions based on the presentation. The first is, why would the Mad River Brewery be denied expansion being a local business?
Can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, it's hard to hear.
The Mad River Brewery, it was spoken about that they were denied expansion, which I didn't know about. Why would a local business be denied expansion and then Danco housing be approved? And it's like the exact same piece of land. And the other question I had was, it was mentioned that some feedback from the public was implemented in making modifications for the housing, and I was wondering what feedback was taken into account and how was it decided what feedback would be taken into account and what feedback would not.
Thank you. Next. Go right ahead.
Mine is really quick. Marty Granger. And it's just so simple. I'm just wondering if the units on Mondo Way could be subtracted from the required units of 34, I heard you say. maybe we could build something that was 24 units instead of 40. I think I would like that.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Scott Oberlees. I was a planning commissioner back in 2019 when we were doing the certification that never got certified. So I was curious as to why that never got officially certified. If there was any reason by the state that they didn't certify it, or. And my other question is, when I was on, there was 5 commissioners. You seem to have 4 commissioners. Is there an opening in your
One's absent.
commission?
We have one absent.
You have one. So anyone here
No,
would
no.
apply to this to become one?
We have 5. One is absent.
Oh, one is absent.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay. All right, thank you.
But thank you.
I'm not going to try to work through the crowd here. My name's Erica Dykehouse. I just wanted to second your comment about, sorry, I just found what it was you said.
About the certification?
About the certification, I just wondered if at some point in time you could comment on, after the presentation, I just wondered what, I too wondered what the barriers were to both certification and acceptance by the city for the previous plans, what were barriers to that. And then I also wondered if at some point y'all would share what are some of the ideas for improving housing stock. Barry had mentioned that they had gone through and noticed there were several houses, a lot of the housing stock in the town was in need of repair. So if there were any ideas for how that might be addressed. And then as far as the ADU, we'll probably send this in an email as well, but incentivizing ADU construction, perhaps doing like a Survey Monkey or something like that for public comment for any of the projects or the properties that you've identified who might meet the requirements and find out what their potential barriers were, why they've not considered doing an ADU at present. Maybe actually doing targeted outreach to those individuals to find out and before you finalize the plan. And maybe it's simply just, maybe there's a cost barrier, maybe if the city could just pay the cost of water and sewer hookup to the property or something like that. I mean, the benefit of having a very low income housing unit, if that person would agree to a certain term of very low income housing unit for their ADU for a certain period of time to offset that water and sewer hookup.
Thank you. Any other comments?
Hello, my name is David Dammy. I've been here since the 1960s. I've been working out of the area, so I've kind of missed some of this. I would just like to know some stuff, and if you can get back to me somehow. Is the population of Blue Lake going up or down? I mean, I think that might have something to do with what's required of, if you have to have more housing or don't have to have more housing. I'd also like to know the process of how Downco got this, or have we been encouraged other contractors to engage in some of these projects? I know that Danco just proposed a place out of Glendale and were turned down by the community because the infrastructure was not adequate. Plus, they didn't want it for a number of reasons. I think Blue Lake has got a very good reputation. I talked to a bunch of people. They want to buy a house in Blue Lake because it's nice, and mainly because of the quality of life. I mean, it's great quality of life, and I'd hate to see some projects go in that could hurt that quality of life. I know a lot of people come from McKinleyville, Blue Lake, Eureka to Walker Trail because it's safe, quality, sun, great place to be. And I'd hate to have them walk right next to a project where that may not be the case. So, yeah, I'd just like to see you guys get back to me on what the process, how did you guys pick Danco? Was there a process where the bids were put in, or did they just propose it and you guys accepted? Thank you.
Very good, thank you.
Can you remind folks we're on the housing element right now?
Yeah. Well, please stay on the housing element, because that's what the open, we haven't got to the other items on the agenda yet.
Hi.
But there will be a public opening for those comments on those other projects, okay?
Yeah, just quickly on the vacant site, is that, it looks like it could be either, I guess the definition of what qualifies something as a vacant site that would be eligible for development. And there seems to be a lot of property there at Blue Lake Elementary, the middle school area there, and it didn't seem to be on those maps at all. So I'm just wondering what qualifies as a vacant site, and if the school was considered, and if it wasn't included, why it wasn't included. Thanks.
Any other public comment?
I just have a question.
Please come to the podium, please.
My question is just, I'm Erin McClure, and I wonder when all of you answer all the questions that all these people are asking, because I never ever see the questions answered, and so we feel like it's a waste of our breath to keep asking them. So can someone answer that?
Here.
I mean, I feel like that's the elephant in the room, and I still see nobody answering it, right?
So this isn't a time where we answer questions. We take the input and then we can request that staff help us answer questions.
When is the time that you answer the
As
question?
soon as we close
As
it.
soon as we close the public
Usually
comment.
the public comment is closed, we'll talk amongst ourselves and with our staff.
And then when do we hear the answers to the questions, sir?
You can actually stay for that and listen.
I think we all should.
Thank you. That's why we're here. Okay, very good. Any more public comments in regards to the housing element? Agenda item?
Yes,
Okay, go ahead.
Angela here.
Yes?
I'm reading this for Kent Sawatsky, who could not be here. He says, please include these comments regarding the 2023 housing element update. The citizens of Blue Lake and others rely upon the Blue Lake general plan to make and understand land use decisions. Therefore, it must be up to date and consistent. The proposed housing element on page 60 states under general plan consistency, the city of Blue Lake will ensure that internal consistency will be remained throughout the planning period by evaluating future amendments as they occur. Review of future amendments will be completed to ensure that no conflicting policies or programs are created within the general plan that would affect implementation of the housing element. Unfortunately, this is not the case. The following are some examples of the inconsistency between the current general plan on the City of Blue Lake website and the proposed housing element and the O-zone. As an example, the proposed Danco project will frequently be referred to. 1, page 46 of the general plan shows the location of the proposed Danco project designated as I industrial. 2, page 48.
Excuse me, we're not talking about the Danco project. It's not the agenda item. The housing element is, so please.
Until the O-zone is incorporated into the body of the general plan is updated and made consistent. The necessary CEQA review, likely, and EIR are complete. It would be inappropriate to permit the project of this size, the Danco project, and the 68.
There again, excuse me, to keep going to the Danco project, we're not talking about it.
Or the general plan.
Or the general plan. Either one, we're talking about the housing element. So you need to stay the comments. Thank you. Please stay on the agenda item, or we're going to be here forever. Okay, so we want you to stay in regards if there's a procedure to follow, and we need you to help us out here to follow it. Any other public comment on the housing element? Excuse me. Excuse me.
You're cutting her off. She was trying to make a point of the inconsistency.
Yeah, but she wasn't staying on the agenda item.
Talking about the housing element.
I'm not going to argue with you.
A general plan is consistent to the housing element.
Yeah, we'll keep circling back around. Yeah.
You can make comments directly to the city attorney if you'd like, separately than here. Thank you. Any other public comment on the housing element discussed on this agenda item? Okay, with no one else coming forward, we will close the public hearing at this time on this agenda item. Okay, commissioners and staff.
Before we begin deliberation, I just want to identify that we have City Planner Bob Brown here. We also have City Engineer Mike Fogut, who can participate in potentially answering some of your questions.
Terrific, terrific. Yeah, there's been some questions asked. Obviously, we would like to try to answer what we can here.
And sorry, Glenn Bernal is here as well from Public Works.
Terrific. Thank you. I appreciate you people being here. Commissioners, I think that we've heard enough public comment in regards to some questions. Maybe they can be cleared up easily enough to keep us going here tonight. Anything we want to talk about?
I have a list of
first.
a few questions I'd like staff to address.
Go for it.
So I think one of the interesting comments that came up is how the individual CEQA relates to grouping projects for an overall CEQA. I think that's important for people to understand, and I think if we could get that explained, it might help some folks.
Okay. So just kind of a general overview. The Powers Creek District, was historically an industrial park, at least how the city planned it. And so, it was developed with access, with infrastructure, a new water tank, all this stuff to, for industrial development. And some of that industrial development never happened, but general plan planned for it. CEQA EIR was done. There was also one done for the industrial park. And so essentially, what the city is doing with that process is saying, okay, we never saw all that industrial development that was planned for and analyzed, in the prior CEQA analysis. And we would like to transition to mixed-use development. That's why the opportunity zone was created and applied to that area down there. So the potential for environmental impacts in a variety of ways, with dust, noise, lighting, truck traffic, etc., emissions, all that kind of stuff, was essentially significantly more under the prior plan, and it is considered to be less, under the current plan. So I'm just kind of paraphrasing from some of the findings that were included in the City Council's adoption and the resolution and the ordinance that were adopted by the Council. And essentially what it said is that CEQA analysis would be required on a project-specific basis. So with that said, when you're considering each project, and you're making a CEQA determination, you have to look at, sometimes you require technical studies if appropriate, like we're doing for some of the projects, and you use all that information as a basis for your CEQA determination. So if you look at the project and you look at the studies and the information available in the record and you say, well, this looks like it would qualify for, say, the infill exemption, like is noted on the agenda, and you can prepare documents and have the special studies attached which justify that and support that, then that's potentially an appropriate route to go. So that's just kind of, what some of the reasoning for why we're considering, say, the infill exemption for these projects. Some of the studies that were done, like, say, traffic study, it was done on a cumulative basis. Traffic seemed to be one of the biggest issues. When you really broke it down on everything, people were very concerned about traffic. So the traffic study included the Bottlewock community area, as folks are calling it, the Danko project. It included the Rousseau project, as well as a potential project on the city's corporation yard, and a potential project just north of Paradise Cave. So those are currently the reasonably foreseeable projects. Now, yes, there's an RV park, and yes, the city got money from Economic Development Administration to look at the potential for that, but we have no idea whether that will ever be developed. It's a very expensive project, and the city would have to get developer on board, etc. So we don't necessarily see that as reasonably foreseeable at this time. It didn't include that in the traffic study. But point being, where it was appropriate to look at things on a cumulative basis, we're doing that, such as in the case of traffic, where it's necessary to do so on a site-specific basis, such as like a biological report or a cultural resource investigation, we're doing that. So when I do the presentation later on, say, the Bottlewock Community Project, for example, I can go a little more into that. But that's essentially, the way the city went about it, is they developed a plan which ultimately proposed fewer impacts than would have occurred under the plan that was done during the last comprehensive general plan update. So CEQA findings are essentially is that you're going to have fewer impacts. Residential commercial development has been proven over time, obviously, to be less impactful than heavy industrial like Blue Lake Power, Calgon Carbon, or things of that nature.
So I think that's been the understanding, is that the impacts were less in general.
Yeah. So, and,
Okay, thank you.
and I may ask, Bob, Ryan, is there anything you guys would like to add on that question?
No, I think you covered.
Okay.
Gary, what is CEQA? Gary, what is CEQA?
We're not generally taking questions, but I will answer that question because it's something that somebody should understand. CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act, and it's the law in which you're required to comply with if something is defined as a project.
All right, thank you, Gary. I appreciate that. Any other questions from the commissioners?
There's lots of stuff we could talk about. I don't want to take too much time, but there are some things that just came up. One of the questions was, how does this document, how does this process help support existing buildings, existing development to upgrade it, to bring it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's listed in the document, but I wonder if you could just talk about that for a second.
Yeah, in their comments on the first draft, they said, you need to talk a little more about how you're going to conserve or rehab your existing housing stock. And, they ask about things like code enforcement. I mean, having a more robust code enforcement, telling people, they need to make their structures more habitable or take care of certain public health and safety, building type issues is one way. The city does their code enforcement on a complaint-driven basis, so there's not, a code enforcement department scouring the city looking for violations and asking people to upgrade their homes. But the softer approach is that some communities have housing rehabilitation programs. Now, the city of Blue Lake used to have one. It's no longer in a position to administer one. It's complicated to do it. And frankly, the requirements on housing rehab funds, only certain folks are able to do that, say folks that meet income requirements. So to own your home and meet these income requirements is not usual. So there wasn't a lot of people that needed those funds, essentially. But point being is the city doesn't have the ability to administer a housing rehab program. Right now, the county is administering housing rehab programs, and those funds could be available to folks in the city. I believe there was somebody recently that got funds to repair their roof through the county. And we spoke with the county about it, and they said, okay, well, our priority is county jurisdiction, but we can direct some of these funds to the cities as appropriate. And so we revised the program to essentially say that the city, after completing its housing condition survey, would coordinate with the county on trying to see what funds could be directed to folks that qualify in city limits. So code enforcement, grant programs, or loan programs, things like that, are two of the kind of main methods for preserving and conserving and rehabbing the existing housing stock.
Okay, very good, thank you.
Bob, any other questions? Another thing that came up, which I thought was interesting, we hadn't talked about before, was we have talked a lot about the sewage treatment plant and upgrading it to be able to take on more development. But we haven't really talked a whole lot about, other infrastructure, fire protection. We don't have police, but sheriff involvement and those things. It might be healthy for people to know what we will look into for that.
Yeah, so each project has been reviewed by the fire department for compliance with fire code, things like that. And in their comments, they didn't express concern about the ability to serve it. And obviously, there's mutual aid agreements amongst all. You'll see every time Blue Lake's rushing off to other communities like that. That's generally how it works in the area. And so, they like to see newer buildings with fire suppression systems designed appropriately so you can evacuate people quickly out of the building. I mean, I think they expressed, frankly, more concern about serving some of the older buildings in the city than they would be buildings like this, just because of the current design standards, fire suppression systems, et cetera. So they participated in the process of review of these projects, identified where certain fire code standards needed to be met, whether it was emergency access on driveways, whether it was the location of fire department connections or fire hydrants or things of that nature. So That was part of the referral comment process. Those comments were passed on to the applicants, and they have to incorporate that into their project design.
Okay.
But just generally for fire, they did not express concern about the ability to serve these projects. As far as police, as we know, the city pays the sheriff, and the city only has so much money to pay the sheriff for the contract. These projects, this is like an inclusionary, kind of, well, I'm getting a little off topic, but we're requiring commercial as part of projects in the Powers Creek district. And hopefully the idea is that commercial would provide sales tax and allow the city to have more revenue to increase its contract with the sheriff and provide greater police service as needed as development occurs in the city.
Very good. Thank you. Any other questions? I'll let some other people talk.
I have a couple more.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Well, the only, no, I'm gonna have to rethink it now, so
Okay.
go ahead.
So I think it would be helpful for folks to understand why we had an adopted planning cycle, but not a certified housing element. Sorry.
Yeah, that was a good question.
Just so that folks can kind of get a sense of,
Yeah, so in prior years, I think the last one that got certified I worked on in 2004, and the city was willing to make the changes to its general plan and to its code and things, and do the analysis to achieve certification. Well, the state has really ramped up the requirements over the years, and there's been certain sticking points that prior city council said, no, we're not doing it. And the consequences at those times weren't as severe as they are today. And there's more funding available today to help communities do this. One of the big sticking points was by right zoning. And what that means is Blue Lake would have needed to pick a particular zone that allowed multifamily by right, just a building permit, no review at all. And the city said, no, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
So this time around, we're proposing a new zoning tool called the Residential High Density Combining Zone, where we'd be able to apply that as an overlay on the specific properties and not have an entire zone that has by right zoning for multifamily housing. The city in the past also didn't want to amend some of its development standards. They're like, no, we want the PDR zone to make it difficult to do multifamily housing and essentially be a single family residential zone in a lot of ways. There were greater height restrictions, greater setback requirements, all this stuff. So, and a lot of our residential development potential was supposed to happen in the PDR zone here west and north of, City Hall here. So those are two examples of where the city just wasn't willing to make the changes in zoning code or to have by right zoning. And they were things as to why they couldn't get certified.
Okay. All right. Good. You have another question?
I had one, specifically regarding ADUs. I know there's a lot of different people mentioning them. That's actually something that we discussed in the past, but maybe it'd be good to rediscuss it here again with regards to the number of the total housing stock that we have accommodated or that we've accounted for being taken care of by ADUs, and exactly what percentage of, even if every place that could build one, like what stock is available for ADUs to be built, because not every property could have one possibly on it.
Yeah, we definitely looked at, as part of the site's inventory, at, you'll see in there, I have not just vacant sites, but underutilized sites.
Right.
Okay, now we're not counting that and saying these are the sites we're gonna, achieve our share of the regional housing need, but I included it in there for informational purposes. This includes some properties, single family in nature, that could have ADUs on there, because they clearly had enough space. Now, that'd be a new detached ADU. As far as the conversion of sheds and garages, things like that, that's hard to predict. You'd have to go around the city and understand who has and hasn't done that already, or that kind of thing. In the first draft of the element, I had a much higher projection on ADUs, and HCD said you need to rethink that. You guys have had 2, like in the last planning cycle. Like, what makes you think you're going to have 18 or whatever it was that I put in there? So I re-looked at it and I said, okay, fine. Let's revise it to something that's consistent with what has happened in the recent past and consistent with the amount of inquiries we're getting. I went with 4, which was like twice as much as we'd had in the prior planning period. So that's essentially 1 a year for the remainder of this planning period. We think that's reasonable and something that could be achieved. It may be more, and I hope it's more.
Yeah, we're not objecting to more.
Not at all. It's just we don't have a proven track record of having a lot of ADU production. A lot of people are interested. They just haven't followed through. And somebody made a comment about surveying folks and finding why that is. I think that's a great idea.
Needs more public outreach.
That was our first step in trying to, expand ADU production was to do more public outreach. And I'd love to know why folks didn't move forward with some of those yet.
Okay, great. All right, more questions, gentlemen?
So the other one, and if I could just take a little bit of time to have you explain, I think there's some misconception about how this process works in terms of the zoning that's being provided by the Planning Commission versus bids coming in and the Planning Commission accepting bids or not accepting bids. And if you could just explain that process so people understand, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what the Planning Commission does in general.
Okay. And if you could rephrase that a little bit, use the term bids, and I don't necessarily know.
It was a question that somebody,
It was a term somebody.
Is it meant to mean project applications?
Yes, yes. And so what I'd like to spend some time on is the difference between providing zoning by right, which the state requires, versus projects getting built and accepted. And they're two very, very different things, and the way that the Planning Commission interacts with them is slightly different. So
right. So I think what you're talking about is kind of the long-range planning that the Planning Commission does versus the development application review.
Yes.
Okay.
Very good.
So the long-range planning that the commission does is planning staff, and staff in general works with the Planning Commission on updates to the general plan and the zoning code. The most recent one that we did was for the opportunity zone and the land use element update. So essentially what that process is we go through an iterative process of making revisions, public hearings, all of it, which culminates in the Planning Commission making a recommendation to the City Council. It's just a recommendation. You're not approving a general plan update or a zoning code amendment. And ultimately, after the Commission does their recommendation, it goes to the Council. And the Council then also holds public hearings and may tweak some of what the Commission did. They can modify it all they want. It may need to go back to the Commission if they modify it in ways you didn't previously consider, that kind of thing. But ultimately, the Council would be the one to adopt it. So you guys recommend it, Council adopts it. It involves a public involvement process, public hearings, all that kind of stuff. And then once those rules are in place, then when individual project applications come in, the Planning Commission is reviewing those project applications for consistency with the general plan and the zoning code and CEQA and things of that nature. So then you have that decision-making authority over these projects. But your decisions can be appealed. They can be appealed to the City Council, either by project opponents or project proponents, depending on what happened. So if it is appealed, then the Council, would have the final say on that. But yeah, the Planning Commission participates in both the long-range planning on general plan zoning code amendments, as well as reviewing individual applications for consistency with those plans and codes.
We also don't select the applicants.
yes,
They're all independent.
we don't bring projects.
Yeah, we don't bring
Absolutely
projects.
not. And if you were engaged in that type of activity, I think you would need to distance yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, there would be a serious conflict of interest.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Probably shouldn't be on the plan.
Yeah. I wouldn't be able to attend that meeting if I proposed it to a developer.
Is there anything anybody else wants to add in regard to
Just
that?
about I was talking about the population going
No,
up and down.
not,
Oh, yeah.
not from the public, but from staff. I wasn't opening it up to the room. I was asking if staff wanted to add anything to what was just said. It doesn't sound like it.
Okay, well, back on the question, the population question that was asked. It's gone, everything I've read, it's gone down. Is that correct?
So when you look back over several decades, I would say the city's population peaked during the heyday of the logging era.
Well, of course.
I don't know if it was 1,400, 1,500, whatever it was. You have to go back and look at the data. But essentially, the city's kind of been in decline ever since kind of the heyday of the logging area. The mill closed, jobs were lost, businesses closed, and that's made things difficult, obviously, for the city to operate because of revenue and things like that. But it went down for a few years, got down to 1,000 or 1,100, and it's been on its way back up. So I would say, according to the Department of Finance, you're looking at maybe 1,300 is maybe what the current estimate is, something like that. You know, and when we held a town hall meeting about the opportunity zone and the housing element update, I threw out a projection just because I thought it would be good for folks to know. What if all of the available lots in the city that could have residential development were developed? What would that mean? What kind of population increase would we see? How many housing units would be added? And I think we got to the point of you had about 500 or 600 additional populations, so you'd still be under 2,000, and you'd add about 250 more housing units. I think there's about 600 in the city. So that's like full build out under the general plan in the city of Blue Lake would be about 1,800 population or thereabouts, and about probably 700 to 800 housing units.
Okay, great, thank you, Gary. Any other questions, gentlemen?
I'll just add a little bit to that. Part of an answer to that question is also been stated already by the public that more people would like to live here, but there hasn't been the ability to be here because we have a pretty limited supply of houses for sale, and people haven't been in a big hurry to develop the lands that they do own and so forth. So there's a bit of that as well.
Yeah, if I could add, the city of Blue Lake has some of the highest housing purchase prices and rental prices in Humboldt County, and has one of the highest median household incomes. It's not very easy to be able to live here. We don't really have affordable housing that meets the state definitions of affordable housing.
Okay, all right, any other questions, gentlemen?
We could go on.
Well, I think we.
I guess I was gonna, could you go into a little bit more detail in how the housing stock was assessed?
Yeah.
And basically, I know there was questions regarding what were considered for the sites that were potential, for development, but also how was it determined what stock you did have? Like, what was the process that we went through?
Yeah, so it's a two-part question. How do we go about the housing conditions survey? And then how do we determine the sites that were available for development?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so housing conditions survey was done kind of how they're typically done. You have a form when you have different things you're looking at. What conditions of the roof in, what's the foundation, how about the siding, how about the windows? And you have a section on the form for each one of those. And you mark, in need of serious rehab, moderate rehab, that kind of thing. And you go by every single property in the city. You look at every single housing unit. The last time the city did one of these, I think, might have been in the 90s when Bob worked on getting the housing element certified back then. It hadn't been done in decades. And so that was one of the things they had on their list. You guys need to update this. You need to know what condition your housing stock is in. I haven't compared the data, or it hasn't been fully tabulated, but to compare it to what it was, back in the 90s, it might show there's more houses in need of rehab.
Sure.
So that's essentially how it was done. Mandy coordinated with her team, city staff, to go to every single property in the city and assess the condition of the residential units. As far as the sites that are available, as I noted before, we have to do a sites inventory. We have to say, here are the sites that are available for development in the city with appropriate development standards, and we believe could accommodate housing for different income levels. So I did both vacant sites and underutilized sites. The state was a little confused by that, but why are the underutilized sites in here? Your vacant sites seem sufficient. Explain to us if you intend to count those underutilized sites towards meeting your regional housing need. I said, no, it's just in there for informational purposes. We're going to go through this exercise of identifying all property that can have housing built on it. We should look at both, but for the purposes of compliance with state housing law, we're showing the vacant sites as being able to meet our RENA allocation, the number of units they allocated to the city. And so one of the processes, if it's a straightforward site, it's like no environmental constraints, good access, totally could be developed today, shovel ready, that's easy. It could have one unit in ADU, or if it was, say, a single family lot. When you get into, say, these lots here along South Railroad with big wetland areas and things like that, that's a different calculation. You literally have to kind of go through and look at the area, consider setbacks that agencies would require from them, what area is left with the other improvements that are needed, access, stormwater improvements, all the landscaping, all these other things. And you have to make a guess based on that kind of assessment on each parcel. Looking at these ones that we've noted for years could accommodate our shared regional housing need. There was a lot of math that had to be done to figure out what actually could happen there because of the constraints. much easier to do down in the Powers Creek district with those large vacant sites that were essentially prepped for industrial development, 30, 40 years ago. They don't really have any environmental constraints. You have the creek along there, but the trail essentially is kind of the border where the setback is met that's required in the city's code for the creek setback. So, a lot of that area in between the trail and Taylor Way on the north side of Taylor Way is, fairly developable. So that was a little bit easier to do that calculation. But so first and foremost, we're looking at vacant sites, and then we have to do a little bit of math to figure out what the actual realistic development potential would be. And that was one of the big lifts. I had to go through and really kind of justify and provide more information explaining how we arrived at those determinations. So I encourage people to read that if they're interested.
All right. Any other questions, gentlemen?
I'm good.
I guess just one real brief. I know there was also mention from the public regarding calculations and projects, intended projects. This is a continual process, correct? Like as we go on, every time, like say there was a project that provided additional housing stock, that's taken into consideration for the element before it's submitted, like up to the date that we submit.
Not necessarily, because we're not calling out like, oh, we have an application right now for 9 units, so, we don't have to, that goes towards this part of our arena, so we only need this many units left. That is done through the annual progress report process. So I think it's every April we have to submit an annual progress report on our housing element implementation, and in there we have to say how many units were developed in what income categories, and how have we been doing on our implementation of our programs in the housing element. So that's an annual reporting requirement, and that's how you track whether you're meeting your share of the regional housing need and whether you're meeting these numbers that were allocated to you. And if those reports show that you're lagging in certain areas, that's where the additional actions come into place, where we have programs that are committing the city to taking additional action if we're lagging in production of the number of units, the income categories for the units, whatever it may be.
There's no guarantee that'll happen.
That's absolutely correct. This is a planning process.
Right.
We're just demonstrating that the city has adequate sites to develop the allocation with reasonable development standards. The city's not building housing. They're not.
And the state's not sending us applicants either.
Yeah, there's no guarantee it'll happen. I mean, a lot of this is market conditions, but what
Right.
they're asking you to do is not be a constraint.
Right.
Don't have rules that are inhibiting and preventing it from happening.
Gotcha. The zoning has to be in place.
Well, the zoning has to be in place, but appropriate as well.
Right.
If you have development standards that are clearly stopping multifamily housing from happening, that doesn't work under state law.
Got it. Okay. All right. Very good. Any other questions, gentlemen? All right. Very good. All right. Next item on that goes with that. This will be referred on to the next meeting.
Yes, if you guys could, do you want to direct them on the action?
Yeah, we'll just need a motion to continue the public hearing to our next regularly scheduled meeting on June 19th.
Very good. Thank you.
I so move.
I'll second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Very good. Thank you. All right, we'll go on to the next agenda item, which has to do with number 5, which is public hearing and discussion. Applicant number 025-021-018, 2023, conditional use permit and site plan approval for the Rousseau Investment LLC for development of a 3-story building that would contain a mix of commercial and residential use. Ground level would be approximately 44,092 square feet, and would include 2,835 square foot of commercial space and a 1-bedroom accessible unit. The upper floors would each include 4 1-bedroom units. The project also proposes related site improvements to include improvement of the access drive from Mondo Way, 16 vehicle parking spaces, 3 bicycle parking spaces, utility extensions, outward door lighting, stormwater, LID features, walkways, open space, landscaping, and siding. The improvements to the access driveway are proposed to include expansion of the driveway onto the city property to the south. To improve access and provide 25-foot driveway width per municipal code section 17.6.111C3 and 17.24.100B4. The project will be requesting exceptions to the development standard in the zoning code that may include building height, setbacks, and off-street parking. This project is found to be category exempt from the California Quality Act, CEQA, per paragraph 15.332, class 32 of the CEQA guidelines. Exempt projects categorized as infill development that meet the criteria. All right, Gary, turn to you.
Okay. Everybody see that okay? We need to turn the lights off. Yeah, you're good. Cool. So I'm going to give a short little PowerPoint presentation. This item's not for action. We're just trying to give you, an update on where the permit process is for this project and provide an opportunity for the public to comment during a public hearing. So it's not that many slides. I'll just go through a couple project concept, a little bit of history about the site and things like that. This is the mixed-use development proposed by the Rousseaus. I think it's specifically Rousseau Investments LLC or something to that effect. So this is a picture here just showing the site here at the end of Monterey there. And as far as recommendation, this is really similar, and it's going to be the same for the next item as well. Essentially, that you receive a staff report, open the public hearing, take public testimony, close the public hearing. As you did for the last item, discuss the project, ask questions of city staff, and I believe we have the applicant here as well, who may be able to answer some questions. And then you wouldn't be continuing it to the June meeting. The project would be scheduled for a public hearing at a future meeting, which hasn't been determined at this time.
Okay, very good.
So just to give a little bit of background, I personally love these old historic era photos that show oblique angles. I think it's the Schuster collection you can find on the Humboldt room. But this is showing the Macintosh Mill, and relevant to this project, it's showing approximately where this project site is at. So you can see the big log pond there. That building right there is currently at the city's courtyard, so that's approximately where the project is. You can see how Powers Creek was channelized at that time and all that.
That's a few years
ago. So this is the project site. Existing conditions are, this site used to have a small building on it that was developed by the prior property owner. And the current property owner has done some nice additions to that building. And it's a nice addition to the Powers Creek district. And they have a bigger kind of build out for this site. They'd like to do the second part of it. And that second part would essentially happen here kind of on the eastern edge. Access would still occur, through here. But this would be kind of the second portion to the development they're proposing on this site. So just to touch on project concept, project description, we're looking at a 3-story building, as I noted, on the eastern edge of the property. This would be a mixed-use project, a mixture of residential and commercial uses. As I may have noted before, the opportunity zone doesn't, well, I didn't say this, it doesn't just allow residential development. You have to have some commercial in there, and typically that commercial would need to be above or behind. And then just to describe kind of some detail about this, ground floor would have about 2,835 square feet of commercial, so mostly commercial on the ground floor, and then a 1-bedroom accessible units, I believe to meet ADA requirements, and then the upper floors would have 4 1-bedroom units on each floor. So in essence, you're looking at just under 3,000 square feet of commercial space and about 9 1-bedroom units. And the opportunity zone does allow 1-bedroom units at a higher density because they are just 1 bedroom. I believe it's 1 unit per 1,250 square feet, whereas 2 or more bedroom units would be allowed at 1 unit per So obviously it's not just the building, there's other site improvements that would go along with this. They would be paving the driveways and parking, maybe adding additional parking, including bike parking. Of course, utilities, some of which have already been installed at the site. There's going to need to be connections to the new building. Walkways, there's landscaping requirements in the city zoning code, open space requirements in the opportunity zone. The city engineer will be requiring them to use the Humboldt LID manual for stormwater features, which means managing it on site and only discharging the city's stormwater system during peak storm events. And then, of course, lighting. And the opportunity zone does have lighting performance standards that dictate design and things like that. One important thing to note is that in order to provide appropriate access for this level of development, we're looking to require them to expand the driveway to 25 feet. And this is kind of part of the overall kind of master plan idea for this part of the Powers Creek district, is that you have access to this site, but also serves the courtyard to the south, so that you have better internal circulation. So you can see the existing access drive here. I think it's around 17 feet wide. We're looking for it to be an additional 8 feet. And you have the city's courtyard here, and there's a bit of an elevation difference. So there would be the requirement to have a portion of this access drive on the city corporation yard, maybe an 8-foot encroachment or something like that in the city's courtyard, and then have that access drive serve both this site as well as any future development on the city's corporation yard. And then this project is required to get a conditional use permit, also site plan approval, but most importantly, a conditional use permit, which means it needs to go to the planning commission, and that's why we're here. So this just kind of outlines like the basic process of getting a conditional use permit. And what it is the applicant submits an application, and that starts the process. Application form, fees, plans, all that kind of stuff. And once we get that, then we send out project referrals to the various city departments, fire district, and any other relevant agencies that potentially have jurisdiction over the project, like state and federal agencies if appropriate. Comments come back from the various departments, and they're forwarded to the applicant to address. That's actually the stage we're at right now for this project. We've gotten comments from the departments, and they are working on updating the plans and their project application to address those comments. After you get through that, they submit a revised submittal. We work on a staff report that includes the CEQA determination under the California Environmental Quality Act. And I don't know that I necessarily explained CEQA well enough before, but the point of CEQA is you analyze the environmental impacts of a project, physical environmental impacts of the project. And it's a whole host of things. We noted traffic and biology and cultural resources previously. Those are just some of the things we analyze under CEQA. So once we have a staff report together and our CEQA determination, then and we know the date that it's going to go to hearing, then there's a 10-day public hearing notice that's sent out. Under state law, you basically draw a buffer around the site of 300 feet. Those are the folks that get a public hearing notice. That's what's required under state law. And then you get to the hearing. And you have a public hearing, and ultimately the Planning Commission makes a decision on whether to approve the conditional use permit or not. So that's just kind of an overview of the conditional use permit process. Both this project as well as the next project that we'll discuss for the next agenda item are subject to the conditional use permit process. And then lastly, just kind of leave it all on the site. So as we go through the discussion or public comment, people have something to refer to.
Very good. Thank you, Gary.
Concludes my presentation, and as noted in the recommendations, I encourage you to open up the public.
Which we'll do. We'll go ahead and open up public comment on this agenda item. Like we did previously, please stay tuned to this agenda item and go ahead and step forward.
Hi, my name is Bernadette, and I just wanted to say that I think we've been met with a lot of hostility for showing any questioning or objection to the Danco project, but I know myself and a lot of people are not opposed to all projects. I personally love to see a local family building, flourishing, doing well. The fact that they're the landlords, when there's a complaint, these people that are living in these buildings are gonna be able to be helped because the people responsible for it are gonna be accessible as opposed to the Danco project. And, I'll hold off on minutes for the.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not much. I didn't have any questions until your presentation. And my suggestion is the little footbridge going over the creek there is pedestrian only. Because of the increased housing and all that, maybe it could be turned into a regular road for fire department only, fire and emergency vehicles only, like with a pole, removable pole or something like that. So if there's a fire, if there's an emergency, it's a heart attack, they can come up, pull the post or open the gate or something like that. So they don't have to go all the way around. So just fire department use only, and otherwise pedestrians and bikes. But just make a larger emergency only bridge. That's just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Hello, Ms. Hoover again. Still my question about, at the bottom of the Blue Lake Planning Commission meetings, it says this project is found to be categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act. Yet, there's going to be a CEQA initial study that was just presented by Mr. Reese. So I'm still confused. This is my initial question at the bottom of this, and also at the Danco one, it says the project is exempt from CEQA. Why is that written there? I've been hearing otherwise. So.
Thank you.
I would like to speak, but out of courtesy to Justin, I don't want to climb over his quote anymore.
Okay.
And I apologize for not giving my name earlier. I'm Julie Christie. I drive by my sheep every day. I'm sure you enjoy them. I would like to go back to Reese's comment that we would have to do an easement onto the courtyard. Is there a financial responsibility of our applicant to get that easement for the roadway? We also want to widen that roadway, yet in our truck route planning, we want to basically tighten our roadways in town here. I just think that's really contradictory. And then going back to infill. Infill is a very unique way that, you know, when you look into lawyers that look into all the housing codes and everything and low income stuff for the state and Danco, they're all professional on this. Infill is a great way to skip out on CEQA. We were told in the beginning that CEQA processing was done on a lot of these projects. That shifted down to infill. Russo's project is an exemplary example of infill that is appropriate for our community. We're getting into a little bit of excess if we further bigger projects in the area. So I would like to say that if we are going to accept this infill as a way to exclude CEQA, this is a developed site where he's at. There's already been laid down aggregates. This is a little bit higher elevation there, the floodplain, all that kind of stuff. His wastewater is going to be able to go in our system versus the bigger cement foundation that's going to require a lot more wastewater or, you know, stormwater collection. It's not going to really affect our wastewater treatment and other resources in town in a way that more projects would. So I am really support of this use of infill particularly, and I'd like to add that.
Thank you. Yes.
Angela Dare, I just wanted to say that I am also in support of the Russo project, and I wanted to add that they have done a lot for people with their different apartments as far as the low income. They've tried to fill that in, so.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
Hi, Chuck Landon. My question is that, so with the easement then taking part of the courtyard, is there already in place development plans for the courtyard and to move that? Because this makes it pretty darn easy to change that. You know, if you make it wide enough and there's access to the courtyard, is that already part of a development plan to take the courtyard into further development or whatever it may be, more apartments or more business, and then to move the courtyard to another spot? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Then Glenn, I also support the Russo's applicants. They've been a lot for the community and they're responsible, and I think they probably conduct a project in a way that the community would support. That said, there aren't very many details in this initial information. There are no elevations, we don't know what it would look like, or the setbacks, or anything about it. So again, I would say that we did work hard on the ozone and asking for exceptions. I hope the planning commission will remember the discussions we had and the reasons we had came to those conclusions for. And I do hope that the trail will be given some consideration in these development projects. But in general, I really appreciate this is a good kind of infill project. I agree with the previous comment.
All right, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Becky Thornton, and I want to say I also like the Russo project. I think that's a good thing for the city, and it fits more with what we're all about.
All right, thank you for your comment. Anybody else?
Yeah, okay.
No, go right ahead.
Kind of a question, comment. So from, if I understood correctly on Gary's overview of this project site, the building that we see currently was essentially a phase 1, and there's a phase 2 proposal, which is this housing thing. But now there's this request for an easement. So why wasn't the placement of the first building placed as such that it wouldn't require an easement? I'm not against the project. I know anybody who says anything negative, you can feel upset. Please don't be upset. But I do wonder about the precedent. There's seems to be a lot of potential access for the corporate yard that could be considered rather than just sort of lumping it in as a justification of allowing an 8-foot easement into the property. That does seem like a lot. So really the first kind of question is, if this is a second phase, why wasn't this considered within the first place? And then that goes back, that kind of speaks to a master plan.
The building was existing, yeah. I tried to make it work.
Okay. And the second is, wow, Matt, you surprised me. That's a cool idea. Is I know anybody who lives on this little section of road that's on the other side of Footbridge would hate that. I guess it's the tail end of Broderick and it's by the arena. But it is also another access point out of there rather than everything going from Taylor Way to Hatchery Road, down Railwood and Greenwood. That's currently where all of this the current traffic is, and the proposed for, what, 9 more units right here, and 40 from Danco, and the potential for an RV park. So again, I think that kind of underscores the need for a master plan on some of this. And that the potential of how else can we have people access these, whether it's emergency personnel or the residents themselves. Thanks.
Thank you. Any more? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Erin McClure. Thanks for letting me speak. I myself am also for any of the old-time families having a project here. That is wonderful. I am wondering if it is exempt from the CEQA, and can this project satisfy any of the need for low-income housing and count for the RHNA requirement? If so, how could that happen? And is it only required to charge less than market rent?
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? All right, with that in mind,
Gary,
go ahead. Sure. Speak up.
Agent of Resource.
Yes.
Just wanted to say that we submitted the site plan, floor plans, and exterior elevations in January 14th to the city, and we received the comments less than 10 days ago and didn't have enough time to respond to it. That's why you're not seeing the details of the plans, and so hopefully we'll be back seeing you guys soon. And yeah, that building was existing, but Kent put it 17 feet from the edge of the fence, I think for his own reasons. And the improvements are going to be a benefit to the courtyard whenever they want to sell it or improve it and sell it too. So, but those details, those comments we just received, so we're going to be responding to that. Thanks.
We assume that, I think, knew that there was going to more to come. So, okay, thank you. Any other comments? All right, then I'll close the public hearing And I'll turn it to my fellow commissioners here with any additional comments or questions. I think what I would make is obviously, we know that there's more drawings coming. We know there's information coming from the different departments within the city for comments on what's been submitted to date, like you stated previously, so we'll get to see all that. And we'll get a chance to review it. It'll be public knowledge. They'll get to see it before our next hearing. And so all of that. So it's tough to just kind of look at that and know what it's been written out in square footage wise and all that kind of stuff. But most of us like to have a picture because it's a picture's 1,000 words kind of thing. So we all need a picture, and it will be coming, so we will get to see it. Nothing happens tonight without getting referred to the next level from that standpoint and getting all the things that Gary talked about that would be coming forward. Commissioners, any questions?
Well, I was wondering if you could just approach the CEQA question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So, I mean, each one of these projects has to be looked at individually for compliance with the Environmental Quality Act, and if it is able to meet the criteria for an exemption, then that's potentially an appropriate determination by the city. So the staff report will contain the basis for an exemption if that's determined to be what's appropriate. We're leaning that way. Obviously, we put in the public hearing notice, it's noted in the staff report,
right.
All that stuff. So we will have to provide a basis for use of that exemption. And there's a bit of a misconception. I know it's called an exemption and it's like, oh, it's not, it doesn't have to deal with CEQA at all when you use an exemption. That's not necessarily true. You still have to do the analysis and provide supporting information on what's called substantial evidence for use of the exemption. And that could come in the form of special studies, like is being required for the Dango project and the traffic study that was required for all these projects. Those studies do all the analysis. Actually, some of them are over here on the table over there, at least for the Dango project. But so, yeah, you have to justify use of the exemption. You can't just say, this exemption applies, end of story. I mean, there has to be some basis for it. So in each one of the staff reports, we'll be providing the basis for use of the exemption as appropriate.
Could you go a little bit deeper in the infill comment?
Sure. Please. Yeah. Let me just go over and grab the CEQA guidelines real quick so I can read from them.
Okay, great.
Jeez. Why asking too many questions?
So the infill exemption is section 15.332 of the CEQA guidelines. And it essentially says class 32 consists of projects characterized as infill development, meeting the conditions described in this section. So you have to meet certain criteria. And what that criteria is that the project is consistent with the general plan and applicable general plan policies, as well as the zoning designation and regulations. Secondly, that the proposed development is in a city on a project site of no more than 5 acres and surrounded by urban uses or development. The project site, the third would be the project site has no values habitat for endangered rare threatened species. Item 4 is approval of the project would not result in any significant effects relating to traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality. And lastly, the site can be adequately served by all required utilities and public services. So you have to provide a basis for each one of those findings. And so there will be analysis in the staff report or potentially an attached document that explains, why this criteria can be met. And that's very similar to the analysis you would do in an initial study or an EIR. They're just specific to these issues identified in the infill exemption.
Okay.
There's also a section that identifies exceptions to the use of exemptions, and these apply to most of the exemptions. And it has things to do with the location. The project may be ordinarily insignificant in its impact on the environment, but in a particularly sensitive environment, it would have impacts. Or you have to consider cumulative impacts or unusual circumstances. Whether it's along a scenic highway would impact views is another consideration. hazardous waste sites, if there's hazardous materials contamination, and then lastly, historical resources such as structures or cultural resources or things of that nature. So if any of those exceptions apply, then you're not able to use the exemption. So in providing the basis for use of an exemption, you both have to consider the criteria for use of the exemption as well as the exceptions to use of an exemption. And so, if that's what we're going to be recommending, we'll be providing a basis in the staff report for those findings.
Great, thank you. That really helped. Hopefully it helped for our audience as well. Question I might have is in regards to the driveway, that additional 8 feet you're talking about would be on city-owned property, correct? But paid for by the developer to expand it, and then it'll be a joint use access for both sites because it'll be widened. Is that correct?
That's the idea, and I would probably defer to possibly the city engineer on the need for it, or the city manager on potentially cost sharing, or if the applicant's paying for it. We haven't finalized the conditions of approval specifically.
Right.
We know the improvement is needed. As far as exactly how that all occurs, still needs to be resolved before this is brought back to the commission. Is there anything either of you would like to add on that item?
I would just say that as part of our, in looking at the courtyard site and its development potential, this has been identified for quite a while as an opportunity to increase ingress, egress, and functionality of the courtyard as well. So it would be a real benefit to the city as well to have that secondary and be able to, bring traffic in and circulate it out and have a secondary egress point.
And good use to the Russo property.
Absolutely. It would make it, and there's a lot of talk about master planning, and there's been a lot of thought that's gone into how these adjoining parcels can work in a complementary fashion and really build, kind of reciprocal economies as things start to get developed. And part of that is having good access, having functionality, and making sure that there is compatibility in those uses. So like I said, it would be very much a benefit to each of us.
I would assume, Cash, you've given us some input in regards to this as well as the project architect. Is that correct?
Can I speak now?
Yeah.
Well, the best advantage of it is that if someone was going to develop on the courtyard, it actually allows the parking spaces to be on the north side of the site, and having the opportunity to have the south side of the site, for seating and landscaping versus parking and access on cars.
Thank you for your.
That's the best thing about it.
All right, thank you. So bigger eyes than ours have been looking at it too, so that's good. Okay, thank you. There's been a comment, and I don't know if you can address, maybe you can address a little bit, a couple of times in regards to the trail and how the existing trail that's there is or isn't being impacted by anything we're looking at in regards to this development or the other developments in that development.
Well, I don't want to speak about the other developments.
Oh, yeah.
And the other project is, but and the property owner could speak to this as well. But I don't know if folks remember, but the trail, used to go and kind of it was on their property basically. I'm not sure why that happened, but anyway, so that's one area that's impacted by the phase one. Is they use their property as they rightfully should, private property rights, all that. And the city, is having to relocate, the trail over to the side. So that's the primary impact. Otherwise, there were comments from staff saying, what's the connectivity going to be between these developments and the trail? Connectivity would be desired, so people could walk right from the trail into the development, that type of thing. As far as improvements to it or anything like that, I would speak to that on the next agenda item.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
All right, can you put into context the Russo project and how that applies to any of the HCD housing requirements, if it does?
Yeah, great question. Somebody asked about that. So, there's various income categories that those units are allocated in, from above moderate, low to very low. So I'm just gonna speculate about how this would qualify, but these are 1-bedroom units, which are gonna be more affordable, but how are they relative to another 1-bedroom unit, and that kind of thing. I mean, it won't cost as much to rent one of these, but I would speculate that it'll fall probably in moderate. The above moderate are usually single family unless they're like really nice apartments. I don't know. But I would just kind of estimate at this point it would fall into the moderate category, which if you look at the RENA allocation, they're asking city to do more very low and more above moderate than the moderate or the low. You'd have to look at the data as exactly how they arrived at that conclusion, but.
Can we ask the applicant directly now?
Sure.
So can that get addressed?
Questions,
So I'm just curious at what level you're putting these single.
I mean, as far as, they're 1-bedroom, I was basically not thinking like a family would be down there. Like people that were possibly working or, a family could go in there, but.
They're 1-bedroom.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of what my theory was, is that's not my target, is kind of the people that are gonna work around there. So, not necessarily families, 3 stories, where to put your stuff, kind of thing.
And if I could just expand, so whatever we ultimately determine income category it fits in, then we report that through our annual progress report to HCD. And we'll, we'd probably survey that and say, what are the rents or this kind of thing, then we'll have to determine, does it fit moderate, does it fit, what categories does it fit in, and then we can identify that as, oh great, that was 9 units that needs, that just meet our RENA allocation in this income category.
Great. All right, that helps. Okay, any other questions from commissioners?
Yeah, there were a couple comments regarding traffic concerns.
Oh, yeah, go.
I know
Yeah,
if you could expand on, I guess, just the ozone in general, and because I know when we were developing the opportunity zone, and the guidelines, one of the things that was considered heavily was traffic and access, and whether or not, additional ingress to it was possible.
Sure. So that's kind of a 2-part question again.
Yeah.
So how we consider kind of internal circulation, ingress, egress, and then what the thoughts were in regards to traffic impacts overall of creation of the opportunity zone and that thing.
How that applies to CEQA.
Yeah.
It's all kind of wrapped in there, right?
Right. So, I mean, for years, staff has looked at it, or the planning and technical assistance grant that was obtained in 2008 or something like that. And the city looked at kind of designs for developing these areas north of Taylor Way, and internal circulation was looked at this time, that there would be access driveways that would serve various lots, and there was ways you could divide them up and things like that. So the city for years has had concepts of how this could happen. Some of that is being looked at as part of this effort for some of these development projects, and some new ideas are coming forward as well. I'm not sure they necessarily looked at how the access would occur with the courtyard at that time. But there's been, multiple ideas of having there be some kind of shared access, potentially coming out through here, so you have better internal circulation, especially for things like delivery trucks and things like that. So also, I guess Paradise K right here, this was one of the access driveways that was considered when there was prior conceptual plans done, and when they went to develop this site, the city obtained headwaters funding to put in this access there on that part of the property, so that it potentially could be extended in the future to serve other parts, and you'd have better internal circulation. As far as traffic impacts overall, we responded to a number of comments on this at the town hall meeting that was held, I think it might have been last year or something like that. And what I noted is when you look at the city's circulation elements, general plan, the level of traffic in town at that time in the mid-'80s was significantly higher than it is today, and the percentage of truck traffic was significantly higher. So traffic overall was far more impactful at that time. They were looking at 3,500 average daily trips on Greenwood. I think now we're at under 2,000 or something like that. I'll have to see what the results of the traffic study said. So ultimately, the way we looked at it is, one, we'd be getting rid of a lot of these, industrial truck trips and things like that, and replacing it with standard vehicles and smaller light trucks and, that kind of thing. But the point being is that from an operational capacity standpoint, there's plenty of capacity left on this roadway. to have additional traffic and to go back up to what that level was. And if you look at the projections of the general plan circulation element, I mean, they were saying at that time, we're at 3,500 trips per day now. This road section could accommodate 15,000 trips and not exceed its operational capacity. Those were the projections. So we're nowhere near that. And development of this whole area down there will not get us near that. Now, of course, there's maintenance issues, and the city's also looking at complete streets improvements along the industrial truck route, narrowing it down for traffic calming purposes, things like that. I know the city engineer and others at SHM have obtained Caltrans funding to develop designs for the complete streets improvements. And really, it's about improving pedestrian and bicycle access and kind of necking things down so you slow down vehicle traffic and make it a more conducive environment to alternative modes. That kind of thing. So anyway, that's just a little bit of background about what was in the general plan and current plan the city has. Ultimately, traffic studies being done for the reasonably foreseeable projects. The Bottlerock community, the Rousseau, the Courtyard, and the potential project north of Paradise Cay. And the preliminary conclusions I've seen is that there wouldn't be operational capacity issues similar to what I said in regards to our general plan circulation element. And because of the mixed-use nature of the development, which is being encouraged by the county as well, vehicle miles traveled impacts would not be significant either. So once that traffic study is complete, it'll be available for folks to review, but those are kind of some of the preliminary results. So really, the county, especially through like its climate action plan, is really encouraging communities to have this kind of mixed-use development pattern because it reduces vehicle miles traveled. It provides potential live-work environments. It provides services in the community so people don't have to travel to other communities. Potentially, reduces GHG emissions, all this kind of stuff. So it is a development pattern they're encouraging communities to move towards. And something Blue Lake's been looking at for a long time. I mean, look around the downtown. Right. You went from retail commercial in the mid-2000s to mixed use, very similar to this opportunity zone. The opportunity zone just allows a little more artisanal manufacturing type uses and things like that. But the city's been moving in the mixed use direction for years now, for at least almost 20 years. So.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Do you need to continue to specify?
Yeah, we sure do.
I think you do.
Yeah. Then we'll end this agenda.
Well, you could just do,
well, first of all, we need to do on this. Do we need to?
They want to
continue this. 9. And first, we need to continue past 9. So we need a.
That could be a motion of the commission at this point.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Go ahead. I'll second it. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll continue on. All right, and we need a recommendation to go. I'll move this on to the public hearing for next time. For what in the future?
Yeah,
for one in the future. If not next time.
I mean, the items essentially could just end. We're not asking you to continue.
Oh, okay, so you don't need to.
No action needed.
Okay, so no action needed
We
like
would
it
be
was.
re-noticing for a public hearing, that
Okay,
kind of thing.
all right,
So.
very good. And this will be continued for a future meeting from that standpoint. Okay, great. All right.
Could I ask, just because of how long it's been, if we could take maybe a 5-minute break?
Yeah, sure.
That'd be really nice.
Absolutely.
Specific question.
Well,
What's that?
yeah.